Picture this. You've been out on the water for hours. You've poured your heart and soul into the perfect bait mix and hit that honey hole with a pinpoint cast. Then finally, a bite. You set the hook, reel it in, and it's another tiny baitfish, no bigger than your thumb. Frustrating, right? Now, what if I told you that your perfect aromatic ground bait isn't actually attracting the big ones? In fact, might be literally screaming at them to stay as far away as possible. I know it sounds crazy, but for most anglers, it's the cold, hard truth. In this video, we're breaking down 20 fatal mistakes that turn your feeder into a free-for-all for the small fry and a keep-out sign for trophy carp or bream. More importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to fix it. Stick around until the end because your fishing game is about to change forever. Before we dive into the specific mistakes, let's take a look under the surface to understand fish psychology. Small fish, the pests, are always hungry. They're everywhere, and they're bold. Their motto is, grab it and run. A cloud of silt or a sharp scent is an instant dinner bell for them. They don't care about competition because there are thousands of them. Now think about the trophies. These are the veterans. They've survived nets, predators, and countless hooks. A big fish isn't going to charge at the first thing it sees. It values safety and silence. Too much commotion, a swarm of tiny fish, or an unnatural smell on the bottom. That's not a dinner invitation, it's an alarm bell. Our goal isn't to throw a noisy, crowded party. It's to set up a high-end exclusive restaurant for VIP guests. Understanding that difference is the ultimate key to success. All right, let's talk about the first and most common mistake, grinding your bait way too fine. Many anglers, especially those just starting out, assume that a smooth, powdery mix is better. They'll spend hours milling grains and breadcrumbs into total dust, thinking it'll create this irresistible cloud underwater. And they're right, it does create a cloud. The problem is, that cloud is a total magnet for small nuisance fish. Those tiny particles drift up instantly, creating a massive pillar of mist that can be seen from a mile away. Small fry will swarm the area in a feeding frenzy, making it impossible for your hook bait to even reach the bottom. Now, imagine you're a big carp or a trophy bream approaching the spot. What do you see? You see a chaotic mess of tiny fish darting around, which usually means it's either unsafe or there's simply no real food there. Big fish are looking for something substantial on the bottom, not a cloud of dust. So remember, your mix needs to have large, visible particles that actually stay on the lake bed. Think of it this way. Would you rather sit down to a hearty bowl of beef stew or a plain glass of tomato juice for dinner? The choice is pretty obvious. The second mistake leads right back to the first one, going overboard with so-called clouding agents. I'm talking about things like powdered milk, cocoa, egg powder, or those fancy geysers and cloud additives you see in tackle shops. Sure, they look impressive. Your feeder hits the bottom, and this massive cloud spreads out, looking like it'll pull in every fish for miles. No, we already know what kind of fish that actually attracts. These ingredients are great for competitive fishing when you need to quickly swarm small, active fish. But for trophy hunting, they're a total deal-breaker. Think of it like blasting loud pop music and strobe lights in a five-star restaurant. You'll definitely attract a crowd of teenagers, but the serious guests are just going to turn around and leave. Big fish want their meal sitting quietly on the bottom. A faint, subtle haze as your bait breaks down is fine. It can even be an advantage. But a thick, lingering pillar of dust, that's a massive red flag. Keep these ingredients to an absolute minimum or skip them entirely if you're serious about landing a real trophy. Let's talk about aromas. Mistake number 3 is going way too sweet, that candy shop vibe. Vanilla, caramel, strawberry, tutti frutti. You know the ones. Walk into any tackle shop and the shelves are overflowing with these sugary syrups and sprays. And sure, they work, but for who? Mostly just the small, non-picky baitfish. To them, that sweet smell means a quick, high-energy snack, but a big seasoned bream or a massive carp, they aren't so easily fooled. As they get older, their preferences shift toward more complex, natural, and savory scents. Think fish meal, meaty tones, or spices like coriander, pepper, and garlic. That's what's going to grab a real trophy's attention. Think of it like this. Kids live for candy and soda, but most adults would choose a savory steak or a rich cup of coffee any day. It's the same with fish. Stop giving them candy. Mix in something a bit more sophisticated and natural, and you'll be surprised at what actually ends up on your hook. Moving on with the topic of scents, mistake number 4 is using harsh chemical attractants, especially those cheap, heavy-duty liquids and sprays. Manufacturers often load these up with aggressive synthetics just to get a strong, lingering smell that appeals to humans. But remember, a fish's sense of smell is hundreds, if not thousands, of times more sensitive than ours. What smells appetizing to you can feel like a chemical attack to a fish. Think about walking into a small room where someone just spilled a whole bottle of cheap cologne. Your first instinct is to get out and find some fresh air. That's exactly how a big, wary fish reacts. An unnaturally intense scent doesn't trigger their appetite, it triggers their suspicion. They know that nothing in nature smells that strong, so they flag it as a trap. You'll have much better luck sticking to natural attractants like grain oils, worm extracts, or high-quality liquids from trusted brands, and even then, use them sparingly. Remember the golden rule, less is more. It's always better to underdose your bait than to overdo it. Mistake number 5 is a boring, uniform texture. Even if you've filtered out the fine dust, having a mix where every particle is the same size, like just breadcrumbs and crushed corn, is a big mistake. A blend like that fills up the small fish quickly, and once they're done, they're gone. But more importantly, it won't hold a trophy fish to a big fish. A uniform mush just isn't interesting. There's nothing to pick through, nothing to root around for. They'll quickly realize there's nothing substantial there and move on to find a better spread. Your bait should look more like trail mix or a chunky stew, not a bowl of cream of wheat. You need different sizes, different densities, and different nutritional values. You want some bits to dissolve fast, some slowly, and others to just sit on the bottom and wait. This forces the fish to work for it, picking out the best morsels. It keeps them in your spot longer, makes them drop their guard, and that is exactly what we're looking for. This brings us to mistake number 6, and it's a big one, not including enough large, nutritious particles in your mix. Think of these as the anchors. They're what actually stop a big fish in its tracks and keep it from moving on. See, breadcrumbs and ground grains are really just the delivery system, they're the base. But the real main course needs to be something the small fry can't just scarf down in one go. I'm talking about things like sweet corn, boiled peas, pearl barley, different sized pellets, or even chopped boilies and live bait. That's what draws in the trophies. A big fish wants to see a spread of safe, high-energy food it can pick off at its own pace. The small fish can hang around and eat the crumbs, but the heavy stuff stays there for the boss. If your mix doesn't have those larger chunks, a big fish might show up because of the scent, but it won't stay long. He'll realize there's no real meal there and just keep swimming. So don't be stingy, load your mix with the good stuff. If it looks like something you'd want to eat, the fish probably will too. Mistake number 7 comes down to how you prepare your particles. We're talking about grains like corn, peas, wheat, or barley. Too many anglers try to cut corners by just splashing some boiling water on them or not cooking them nearly long enough. This leaves the grains hard and basically inedible. Think about it. You toss them into the water, they sit on the bottom, and sure, they might smell all right, but the fish can't actually eat them. Even worse, if a fish does swallow those hard seeds, it can cause some serious digestive issues. You're not just failing to attract fish, you're actually training them to avoid your spot because the food is low quality. Properly prepared grains should be soft enough to easily crush between your fingers. When they're fully cooked, they're not only more appetizing, but they also soak up scents and additives way better. Take the extra hour to boil them properly or let them steep in a thermos. Believe me, the fish will appreciate the effort, and you'll definitely see the results in your hookup rate. Mistake number 8, and even the pros make this one. Overlooking live bait. We get so caught up in the latest fancy boilies, pellets, and liquids that we forget what fish actually eat in the wild. I'm talking about bloodworms, maggots, and chopped up earthworms. Adding these to your ground bait can honestly work miracles. First, it sends out a massive food signal. The scent and taste of pure animal protein beats any artificial flavor hands down. Second, it's all about the movement. Larvae wiggling on the bottom create micro vibrations and a visual trigger that big fish simply can't ignore. It taps right into their natural hunting instincts. While the small fry love it too, they fill up quickly. A big slab of a bream or a trophy carp, on the other hand, will stay on your spot for hours, picking out every last worm. Yes, it makes your bait a bit more expensive, but sometimes just a handful of chopped worms in your feeder is the difference between a slow day and landing the fish of a lifetime. Don't skimp on what fish are already eating every day in their natural habitat. Mistake number 9. Your ground bait is way too active. We've already talked about clouding agents, but there are plenty of other ways to make a mix work through the water column. I'm talking about things like fizzes, pop-up particles, or even hemp seeds that float up as the feeder breaks down, dragging other bits with them. Now that kind of action is highly effective when you're targeting fish mid-water, like active roach or bleak. No, if you're bottom fishing for big, wary fish, it's a total mistake. Think about it from a big bream's perspective. You're peacefully feeding off the bottom, and suddenly there's a literal firework display of particles shooting up over your head. It creates a ton of commotion, attracts crowds of annoying small fry, and frankly, it just looks suspicious. Large bottom feeders want a calm environment. They want a buffet that's neatly laid out on the floor, not flying around. When you're going after a trophy, your mix needs to be inert. That means once it hits the bottom, it stays put. It should break down slowly and release its scent right there, rather than exploding and scattering particles all over the place. Mistake number 10 is one most people totally overlook: picking the wrong color for your ground bait. We usually focus on the scent or the ingredients, but color is just as critical, especially in clear water or when you're dealing with spooky fish. Think about it. The bottom of most lakes and rivers is dark, usually brown, grey, or mossy green. Then you go and drop a bright yellow or red pile of bait right on top of it. To a fish, especially a big, cautious one that looks completely unnatural, it's like a neon sign screaming, "Danger! Something's not right here." The pros always make sure their mix matches the bottom. They'll use dark dyes or even mix in some local dirt or clay to get the right blend. When your bait blends in, the fish don't get spooked. They feel safe and will actually stay and feed. You should save those bright colors for your hook bait. That way, it stands out against the buffet you've laid out. You want the main pile camouflaged, but your hook to pop. Honestly, just darkening your mix can be the single thing that turns a slow day into a massive haul. Mistake number 11 is all about consistency, specifically overwetting your mix. You might think adding a little extra water isn't a big deal, but it can actually ruin your entire day on the water. Too much water turns your ground bait into a sticky, doughy mess. It might feel fine when you're packing the feeder, but once it hits the bottom, it's basically dead weight. It just sits there like a rock, releasing 0 scent or particles. Fish could be swimming right over it and never even get a food signal. At best, it'll take hours to break down, probably right as you're heading home. At worst, it'll just sit there and sour, actually scaring the fish away. The perfect mix should be light and fluffy. You want it to hold its shape when you squeeze it, but crumble apart with just a light touch of your thumb. This consistency ensures your bait stays in the feeder until it hits the bottom, then immediately starts breaking apart to create an active feeding zone. The trick is to add your water slowly in small stages and keep mixing until it's just right. Mistake number 12 is the flip side of the coin, underwetting your bait, and believe me, it's just as big of a problem. If your mix is too dry, it simply won't hold its shape. When you cast, the ball might break apart in mid-air. Or, if you're using a feeder, the bait will wash out the moment it hits the water, or while it's still sinking. The result? You fail to create a concentrated feeding zone on the bottom. The current catches those dry particles, scattering them over a wide area. Sure, you'll attract plenty of small baitfish, but you won't be able to pin them down in one spot. More importantly, you have no chance of holding big fish on such a thin spread. Large fish aren't interested in vacuuming up tiny crumbs scattered across a massive tablecloth. They want a full plate of food in one specific spot. That's why finding the perfect moisture balance is so critical. Your bait needs to be wet enough to reach the bottom intact, but loose enough to start working once it lands. Mastering this takes practice, but it's one of the most essential skills any angler can have. Mistake 13 is a big one, especially during those early spring or late fall trips. I'm talking about using scents that are way too strong for cold water. There's a common myth that the colder the water, the more aroma you need to wake up passive fish. But in reality, it's just the opposite. In cold water, a fish's metabolism slows way down, making them sluggish and extremely cautious. While scents don't travel as fast in the cold, they stay concentrated for a much longer time. A heavy, concentrated scent ends up acting like a chemical irritant. It's unnatural, and it spooks the fish. Think about how a forest smells after a spring rain. Those light, earthy, subtle notes. That's exactly how your bait should smell. When the water is cold, the less is more rule works every time. Stick to delicate, natural scents, or skip the extra additives altogether, and just rely on the natural aroma of your grains and base mix. Sometimes, the best cold water bait is the one you can barely even smell yourself. Mistake number 14, ignoring the nutritional value of your ground bait. A lot of budget-friendly mixes are packed with fast carbs, things like breadcrumbs, bran, and crushed cookies. Now, these ingredients are great for getting a quick reaction because of that sweet scent and flavor. They create instant activity in your swim. But here's the catch, they fill the fish up way too fast. Small fish will gorge themselves on these high-calorie, low-nutrient fillers and then just move on. But big trophy fish, they're looking for protein, especially when they're growing or bulking up for winter. To them, a pile of breadcrumbs is just empty calories. If you want to keep those big fish hanging around, you need to pack your bait with protein. I'm talking about high-quality fish meal, krill meal, crushed pellets, or even powdered milk. These ingredients send out a powerful feeding signal and offer real nutritional value. When a big fish realizes it's found a legitimate food source, it's going to stick around much longer. So, remember, don't just give the fish dessert, serve them a full-course meal. Ошибка номер 15 касается вашей тактики закорма. Многие рыболовы, особенно в фидерной ловле, стараются быть максимально точными, стараясь раз за разом попадать кормушкой буквально в монету, чтобы создать плотное, концентрированное пятно. Если ваша цель – наловить много мелкой рыбы на соревнованиях, это оправдано. Но когда вы охотитесь за настоящим трофеем, такая стерильная точность может все испортить. Представьте, к вашей точке подходит крупный, осторожный лещ. И что он видит? Идеально ровную, аккуратную кучу корма, которая выглядит абсолютно неестественно. В дикой природе еда редко лежит такими безупречными горками, и это может его насторожить. Крупная рыба чувствует себя гораздо увереннее, когда корм немного разбросан, имитируя естественную кормовую поляну. Поэтому при стартовом закорме не бойтесь давать небольшую погрешность. Вместо одной точки создайте своего рода кормовой ковер диаметром в 1–1,5 метра. Это позволит рыбе подойти к угощению с любой стороны, не пугаясь, и начать кормиться более смело. Она будет спокойно перемещаться по вашему столу, и шансы на то, что она уверенно возьмет именно вашу насадку, вырастут в разы. Mistake 16 is overlooking the use of a dead or inert base. Sometimes your goal isn't to create a massive cloud of scent and activity. Instead, you just need to get the heavy stuff like corn, peas or pellets straight to the bottom. This is especially important on fast-moving rivers or in spots swarming with small nuisance fish. If you mix your heavy feed with an active, high-nutrient groundbait, the current will wash away the attractants before your feeder even hits the mud. All you'll end up doing is calling in every small fish in the area. That's where a heavy, low-activity base saves the day. The simplest and most effective option is just plain molehill soil or clay. By mixing your large particles with a heavy binder, you're ensuring the feed actually reaches the bed. Soil doesn't have a strong scent and doesn't create much of a cloud, so it won't draw unwanted attention from the small fry. But when a big fish cruises by, it'll definitely notice that pile of tasty grains or pellets waiting on the bottom. It's a tactic for the patient angler, but nothing weeds out the small fish better than this. Mistake number 17 is the misconception that your hook bait has to be an exact match for what's in your chum. Now the logic is sound. Fish get used to a specific food source and start feeding with confidence. And most of the time that works. But what do you do when you know there are big fish on your spot? They're feeding aggressively, but you aren't getting any bites. It usually means your hook bait is simply getting lost in the crowd. It's just one more grain of corn among thousands. In these situations, you actually need to do the opposite. Make your bait stand out against the rest of the spread. You want to make it more visible and more enticing. How do you do that? One way is to use a bright, contrasting color. For example, if you're chumming with yellow corn, try a single red or white grain on the hook. You could also use a pop-up to lift your bait just off the bottom. Or you can give it a boost with scent by using a concentrated dip. That one little standout object is often the final trigger that provokes a fish to strike. Mistake number 18 is ignoring the clock, or, to put it simply, just being impatient. Big game baiting isn't a magic wand. It doesn't work instantly. Think of it like this. You've set the perfect table on the bottom. Now what happens next? As usual, the small fry show up first. They start darting around, picking at the scraps. That commotion, in turn, draws in the bigger fish, the decent-sized ones. Only then, maybe an hour or even 2 hours later, will a real trophy move in. He's going to hang back for a long time, just watching the scene. If everything feels calm and the bait doesn't look suspicious, he'll finally move in to feed. This is where a lot of anglers mess up. If they don't get a hit in the first 30 minutes, they start overthinking it, adding scents, changing the mix, or constantly recasting. All that fussing just spooks the cautious fish that was probably already lurking nearby. You have to settle in and wait. The best tactic here is simple patience. Let the bait do its job. Mistake number 19. Blindly copying tournament-style bait recipes. We've all been there, watching pro tournament footage or reading articles and trying to mirror their exact mixes. No, we're overlooking the most important part. A pro angler's goal is worlds apart from a trophy hunter's. In a competition, it's all about volume. Every single fish counts, whether it's a tiny dink or a small panfish. That's why their baits are hyperactive, high scent, and designed to create a massive cloud in the water. They want to trigger a feeding frenzy and pull in anything that swims as fast as possible. But when you're after a trophy, that's the last thing you want. You don't want chaos, you want a calm, nutrient-rich spot. Using a pro-style mix for trophy fishing doesn't just fail, it actually hurts your chances. It does the exact opposite of what you need by attracting the very bait stealers you're trying to avoid. So, learn from the pros, but always adapt their techniques to your own specific goal. Remember, trophy fishing isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And finally, number 20, the biggest mistake of all, being afraid to experiment. Look, there is no such thing as a magic recipe that works every single time, everywhere you go. Every body of water is unique. In one lake, the carp might be hitting on strawberry. In another, they won't touch anything but garlic. On one river, the fish might want a dark mix, while on the next, they're looking for something bright and light. Fish change their preferences constantly depending on the season, the weather, and what they're naturally feeding on. The biggest trap you can fall into is finding one mix that works once and then sticking with it for years without ever changing a thing. Fishing is a constant game of trial and error. Don't be afraid to switch it up. Toss in an unusual spice, tweak the color, or play around with the texture. Analyze your results. What worked today? How did it differ from last week? Keep a log and write down your observations. The anglers who consistently land the big ones are the ones who never stop learning and aren't afraid to break the mold. Your best bait isn't something you just buy, it's something you build through experience, specifically for the water you're fishing. So, what's the deal? All this time we've been dropping serious cash on high-end attractants and hyperactive ingredients, but what if we were actually scaring off our dream catch all along? It turns out the secret to landing a trophy isn't massive clouds of silt or overpowering smells. Big fish aren't looking for louder and sweeter. They're looking for smarter, subtler, and more natural. Let's break it down. If you want your bait to be a trophy magnet instead of just attracting small fry, here's the game plan. Focus on larger particles, use mild, natural scents, keep your mix heavy and pinned to the bottom, match your colors to the lake bed, and, most importantly, stay patient. Your goal is to set a rich, safe, and nutritious table that only the biggest, wisest fish in the water will truly appreciate. Thanks for watching to the end. If you found this helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into fishing secrets. Now, I want to hear from you. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made with your bait? Or maybe you've got a secret ingredient of your own for those monsters. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your stories.